The signal was old. So old that most species in the galaxy had forgotten it even existed. It traveled through the cold emptiness of space, a cry for help that had not been used in 3,000 years. The Galactic Distress Protocol was meant for the worst moments in history, and now it pulsed again on the crystalline world of Eloria. Elder Soraya stood at the transmission console with trembling hands. Her skin glowed with soft blue light, the natural bioluminescence of her people flickering with fear. Around her, the other Iolari elders watched in silence. They had never seen their leader afraid before. They had never had a reason to be afraid. The Iolari were healers. For 10,000 years, they had dedicated their existence to peace. Their bodies produced enzymes that could cure diseases across 100 species. Their empathic abilities allowed them to feel the pain of others and soothe it away. They had no weapons. They had no army. They had evolved beyond violence, building a society based on compassion and shared consciousness. But compassion could not stop the ships that now surrounded their world. The Kethver Dominion had arrived 3 days ago. Their fleet of 300 warships hung in orbit like a swarm of metal insects, blocking out the stars. The Kethver were conquerors. Their insectoid bodies were built for war with armored exoskeletons and razor-sharp limbs. They moved as one, connected by a vast hive mind that allowed millions of individuals to think and act together. And they wanted the Ilari, not their planet, not their resources. They wanted the Ilari themselves. Kethver scientists had discovered that Ilari neural tissue could be harvested and integrated into their hive mind. Each Ilari brain could increase the processing power of their collective consciousness by a factor of thousands. To the Kethver, the gentle healers were not people. They were components. Parts to be collected and used. Soraya had tried everything. She had contacted the Galactic Coalition, great alliance of spacefaring species that was supposed to protect the innocent. She had begged before their council, her voice breaking as she described what the Kethver intended to do. She had shown them evidence. She had pleaded for intervention. The Coalition had refused. The speaker of the Coalition, a tall being made of living crystal, had looked down at her with cold indifference. The Kethver Dominion commands significant military power. Intervention would mean total war. We cannot sacrifice millions of lives across dozens of worlds to save one species. The mathematics do not support it. Mathematics. They had reduced her people to numbers on a chart. Soraya had returned to Eloria with nothing but despair. The evacuation ships had tried to flee, but Kethver interceptors destroyed them before they could reach the jump point. There was no escape. In 48 hours, the invasion would begin, and her people would be dragged from their homes to become fuel for an alien machine. She stood in the transmission chamber now because of something her youngest advisor had said. Kale was barely 30 years old, considered impulsive and reckless by Ilari standards. But when all hope had vanished, he had spoken words that made the entire council freeze. "There's one species we have not asked, the Deathworlders." The chamber had gone silent. Even Soraya had felt a chill run through her luminescent skin. The Deathworlders. Humans. They came from a planet called Earth. A world so hostile that the Galactic Coalition had classified it as a Class 12 environment. The highest danger rating possible. The gravity alone would crush most species. The atmosphere was filled with oxygen, a gas so reactive and corrosive that simply breathing it should have been fatal. The planet was covered in predators, natural disasters, and extreme temperature variations that no sensible life form could survive. And yet humans had not only survived, they had thrived. They had conquered their world and reached for the stars. The Coalition had banned them from membership. They were considered too dangerous, too violent, too unpredictable. Their history was filled with wars, conflicts, and something they called competitive sports that other species could not distinguish from actual combat. They formed emotional bonds so strong that they would die for complete strangers. They kept predators as pets. They consumed poison for recreation. They were terrifying, but 70 years ago, a human colony fleet had passed through Ilari space. A plague had broken out on their ships, a disease that human medicine could not cure. The Alari had responded without hesitation. They had healed every human, asking for nothing in return. It was simply what the Alari did. They remember their debts, Kale had said quietly. Every report we have about humans says the same thing. They never forget those who help them, and they never forgive those who harm the people they care about. Soraya had argued against it at first. Bringing humans into this conflict could make everything worse. They were volatile, unpredictable, dangerous. But then she had looked out the window at the Kethfer fleet and realized something simple. Her people were already facing extinction. What did they have to lose? So she stood at the transmission console, activating a frequency that predated the coalition itself. The ancient distress protocol, designed to reach anyone listening anywhere in the galaxy. Her hands trembled as she spoke. This is Elder Soraya of Valoria. My people are facing annihilation. The Galactic Coalition has abandoned us. We have nowhere else to turn. She paused, her voice breaking. If anyone can hear this message, please help us. We are running out of time. The message went out into the void. Soraya waited, surrounded by the soft glow of her fellow Ilari, watching the console for any response. Days passed. The Kethfer fleet grew larger as reinforcements arrived. Invasion transports began positioning themselves for atmospheric entry. On the surface, the Alari could only watch and wait, holding their children close and trying not to think about what was coming. On the 16th day, when hope had all but died, the console lit up. A voice crackled through the speakers. It was rough, determined, and speaking in a language that the translation software struggled to process. But the words were clear enough. We heard you. We are coming. Hold on. Soraya stared at the console, her bioluminescence flickering wildly. Beside her, Kale leaned forward with wide eyes. Who responded? He whispered. The console displayed the origin point of the transmission. A small planet in an unremarkable solar system on the edge of explored space, a world of blue oceans and green continents, circling an average yellow star. Earth, the Deathworlders, had answered. Soraya did not know whether to feel relief or terror. She had called for help, and something had responded from the void, something that even the Kethfer Dominion might have reason to fear. She looked up at the Kethfer, fleet hanging in her sky like a death sentence. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a small, fragile hope. Help was coming. She just had to pray that her people would survive long enough to see it arrive. Commander Alina Vance was reviewing patrol reports when the message arrived. She sat in her office at the United Earth Defense Coalition headquarters, a cup of black coffee growing cold beside her. Outside her window, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Its waves crashing against the coastal cliffs of New Vancouver. Her communications officer burst through the door without knocking. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking as he held out a datapad. Commander, you need to hear this. Right now. Alina took the device and pressed play. A voice filled the room. It was translated from an alien language, but carrying unmistakable emotion. Fear, desperation, hope fading into nothing. This is Elder Soraya of Valoria. My people are facing annihilation. Alina listened to the entire message without moving. When it ended, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then she stood up, grabbed her uniform jacket, and headed for the door. Get me the Joint Command Council. Emergency session. Now. 2 hours later, Alina stood before the most powerful military leaders on Earth. The council chamber was a massive room built into the heart of a mountain. Designed to survive anything from nuclear strikes to asteroid impacts, the walls were lined with screens showing fleet positions, resource allocations, and threat assessments from across known space. The council members listened as Alina played the Ilari transmission. When it ended, she spoke. The Ilari are facing extinction. The Kethfer Dominion has surrounded their homeworld with 300 warships. They intend to harvest the Ilari population for biological integration into their hive mind. The Galactic Coalition has refused to intervene. Admiral Chen, the eldest member of the council, leaned forward. His hair was white, his face lined with decades of service, but his eyes were sharp as ever. The Alari, he said slowly. They helped our colony ships during the plague of 2847, saved 12,000 lives. Asked for nothing in return? Yes, sir, Elena confirmed. They simply said it was what they do. The council chamber fell silent. On the screens around them, data scrolled about the Kethfer Dominion, their military strength, their territory, their history of conquest. Every analysis suggested that direct confrontation would be costly. General Morrison, the head of ground forces, spoke up. The coalition banned us from membership because they think we are too dangerous, too violent. Now they abandon an innocent species because fighting for them is too risky. He shook his head in disgust. And they call us the monsters. Alina nodded. The Alari have no military, no weapons. They evolved beyond violence because they never needed it. They trusted the galaxy to protect them. The galaxy failed. Admiral Chen stood up slowly. Despite his age, he commanded the room with quiet authority. When humanity first reached the stars, we were alone. No allies, no friends. The coalition looked at our homeworld and called it a death trap. They looked at our history and called us savages. They feared what we might become. He walked to the main screen, where an image of Aloria hung in the void. Surrounded by Kethfer warships, the Alari looked at our dying colonists and saw only people who needed help. They did not fear us. They healed us. He turned back to the council. What kind of species would we be if we abandoned them now? The vote was unanimous. Over the next 72 hours, the human military machine roared to life. Warships that had been stationed across a dozen systems received orders to converge on a single point. Soldiers were briefed on Kethfer biology and tactics. Engineers loaded weapons and checked systems. Supply ships filled their holds with ammunition, medical supplies, and rations. Alina personally oversaw the preparation of the flagship, the UES Horizon. She walked through its corridors, speaking with crew members, checking readiness. The ship hummed with barely contained energy. Everyone knew where they were going. Everyone knew what they were about to face. In the briefing room, she gathered her senior officers for one final meeting. Intelligence has given us everything they have on the Kethfer, she began. They are a hive mind species. Individual units have limited autonomy, but when connected to their collective consciousness, they operate with perfect coordination. Their fleet outnumbers us 7-1. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Cole, her second-in-command, raised an eyebrow. 7-1? Those are some interesting odds, Commander. Alina allowed herself a small smile. I thought you would appreciate a challenge. The room chuckled, but the tension remained. Everyone understood the stakes, Alina continued. The Kethfer have never faced humanity in combat. They have studied us from a distance. They know about our biology. They know we come from a heavy gravity world with a toxic atmosphere. They know we require sleep and form emotional bonds. She paused, letting her words hang in the air. They think these things make us weak. They think our attachments are vulnerabilities. They are wrong. Her voice hardened. We do not fight despite our emotions. We fight because of them. We fight for the people we love. We fight for the strangers who showed us kindness. We fight because giving up is not in our nature. She looked around the room at the faces of her crew. Men and women from every nation on Earth, scientists and soldiers, engineers and pilots, all of them volunteers, all of them ready. The Ilari called for help because they believed that somewhere in this galaxy, someone still cared about doing the right thing. They reached out into the darkness, and we answered. Now we are going to show the Kethfer exactly what that means. The fleet departed 12 hours later. 42 human warships, representing the finest technology and training that Earth could produce. They jumped through hyperspace toward a distant star system, where a peaceful species waited for salvation. As the stars stretched into lines around them, Lena received a final intelligence update. The Kethfer had begun moving their invasion transports into position. The attack on Aloria would begin within days. She studied the numbers on her screen. 300 enemy ships against 42? Any rational analysis said they were outmatched. But Alina Vance had read human history. She knew what her species could do when the odds were against them. When the cause was right, when surrender was not an option, she closed the report and looked out at the swirling colors of hyperspace. The HFY had studied humanity from a distance and thought they understood. They had seen the numbers and drawn their conclusions. They had no idea what was coming. Supreme. Commander Vrexus stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the sensor displays with growing amusement. His insectoid body clicked with satisfaction as the data scrolled across the screens. 42 ships. The Deathworlders had sent only 42 ships, against his armada of 300. His mandibles clicked together in what passed for laughter among the HFY. He had studied the humans carefully. He knew about their heavy gravity world, their poisonous atmosphere, their persistent biology. He had read reports about their history of conflict and their strange, emotional attachments. None of it impressed him. The humans were soft. They needed sleep. They formed bonds with weaker creatures and called them family. They wasted resources on individuals instead of serving the collective. They were fundamentally inefficient, and now they had come to challenge the Dominion with a fleet that could barely qualify as a patrol group. Let them come, Vrexus commanded. This will be entertaining. The human ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. They moved with surprising coordination, spreading out into a pattern that Vrexus did not immediately recognize. It was not the standard linear approach that most species used for fleet combat. It was something else entirely, a communication signal cut through the silence. The humans were requesting an open channel. Vrexus accepted. Curious to hear what the Deathworlders would say before they died, a human female appeared on his screen. She had dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes that showed no fear. She stood on her bridge as if she commanded 1,000 ships instead of 42. "This is Commander Elena Vance of the United Earth Defense Coalition," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, almost casual. "You have 60 standard minutes to withdraw from Alari space. There will be no second warning." Vrexus stared at the screen for a moment. Then the clicking laughter erupted across his bridge, echoed by every HFY officer present. 60 minutes? Vrexus replied, his translator rendering his clicking speech into human language. "Little mammal, you amuse me. We have studied your kind. You are soft. You require sleep. You form emotional attachments. These are weaknesses. You cannot threaten us." The human female smiled. It was a strange expression, pulling back her lips to expose her teeth. Other species might have mistaken it for submission. Vrexus knew enough about humans to recognize it as something else entirely. "You studied us," she said. "Then you missed the important part." She leaned forward slightly, and her voice dropped to something colder. "We do not fight despite those things. We fight because of them. You have 59 minutes remaining." The channel closed. Vrexus dismissed the threat with a wave of his forelimb. "Continue invasion preparations. These creatures are delusional." On the surface of Aloria, Elder Soraya watched the confrontation from the Planetary Defense Center. The center had never been designed for war. It was originally a weather monitoring station, repurposed in desperation when the HFY arrived. Beside her, Kale tracked the human fleet on his console. His bioluminescence flickered with nervous energy. 42 ships, he whispered. They came with only 42 ships. What can they possibly do against 300? Soraya did not answer. She watched the human vessels holding their positions unmoving as the countdown continued. She had felt something when the human commander spoke, a resonance that her empathic abilities could not fully interpret. Not fear, not anger, something else, confidence. The minutes passed slowly. The HFY fleet ignored the ultimatum entirely. At the 50-minute mark, their invasion transports began moving toward Aloria's atmosphere. Massive vessels filled with soldiers and harvesting equipment, ready to begin the terrible work of processing an entire civilization. Soraya felt despair rising in her chest. The humans were going to watch it happen. They were going to witness her people being taken and do nothing at the 59-minute mark. The human fleet still had not moved. Kale turned to her with tears forming in his luminescent eyes. "They are not going to help us. They cannot. The numbers are impossible. Soraya opened her mouth to respond, but something on the sensor display caught her attention. The human flagship had gone dark. All its external lights had switched off. The ship hung in space like a shadow, completely silent. Then a transmission burst across every frequency. A single voice: Commander Vance. Operation Reckoning. Execute. Everything happened at once. The human fleet did not attack head-on. They scattered. Every ship moved in a different direction, accelerating at speeds that should have been impossible. They wove between HFY vessels, too fast to target, too unpredictable to follow. On the HFY flagship, Vrexus screamed orders at his officers. Target them. All batteries, fire. His ships obeyed, but their weapons struck empty space. The humans were not fighting like any species the HFY had ever encountered. They were not forming battle lines. They were not engaging in honorable ship-to-ship combat. They were hunting. A HFY cruiser exploded without warning. Then another. Then 3 more. The human ships struck from impossible angles, vanishing before retaliation could be organized. They moved like a pack of predators, coordinating without visible communication, anticipating each other's movements with eerie precision. Rexus watched his fleet descend into chaos. Ships that had never experienced surprise were suddenly scrambling to respond to attacks they could not predict. The human strategy violated every principle of galactic warfare. And then something worse happened. A burst of electromagnetic energy swept through the HFY formation. Every communication system flickered. The constant hum of the hive mind connection stuttered and broke. For the first time in their lives, individual HFY officers found themselves alone in their own heads. Panic spread through the fleet. Without the collective consciousness guiding them, the HFY could not coordinate. Ships began firing at shadows. Commanders who had never made an independent decision in their existence suddenly faced the terrifying reality of isolated thought. On the planetary surface, Soraya watched in amazement as the human fleet carved through the HFY armada like a blade through water. Her empathic senses reached out toward the battle. What she felt from the HFY shocked her. Fear. Pure, overwhelming fear. Kale grabbed her arm, his bioluminescence blazing with sudden hope. They are winning. The humans are actually winning. But Soraya's attention had shifted to a single point on the sensor display. The HFY flagship. It was moving away from the battle, positioning itself directly above her capital city. Supreme Commander. Rexus appeared on the planetary communication channel, his clicking voice ragged with rage. If the Dominion cannot have the Ilari, he snarled, then no one will. I am activating the plasma core. Your world burns in 3 minutes. The channel cut out. Soraya looked up at the sky, where the HFY flagship hung like a judgment waiting to fall. 3 minutes until every Ilaria on the planet's surface was reduced to ash. The humans had fought brilliantly. They had done the impossible. But 3 minutes was not enough time to save them, Commander. Lena Vance heard the threat and felt her blood run cold. The HFY flagship was positioning itself for a planetary bombardment. The plasma core, once fully charged, would turn the surface of Eloria into molten glass. 3 minutes. 180 seconds to save an entire civilization. All ships, disengage current targets, she ordered, her voice sharp and clear. Focus everything on the flagship. We need to stop that plasma core, her fleet responded instantly. Human ships broke away from their scattered attacks and converged on Vrexus's vessel. Weapons fire filled the void as they tried to breach the flagship's shields. But the HFY flagship was the most heavily armored vessel in the Dominion fleet. It could withstand sustained assault for hours. They did not have hours. They barely had minutes. Shields are holding, her tactical officer reported. At current rate of fire, we will not breach them in time. Lena stared at the display, watching the plasma core charge climbing toward critical. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. 2 minutes 15. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Cole's voice cut through the chaos. Commander, I have an idea. I am listening. The plasma core requires a precise energy balance to fire. If we could destabilize it before full charge, the reaction would collapse harmlessly instead of detonating. Cole's voice was steady despite what he was about to suggest. A direct impact on the core chamber would do it. Something fast enough to punch through their armor before point defense could react. Elena understood immediately. Her throat tightened. You were talking about ramming the flagship? Yes, ma'am. My ship, the Defiance, is the fastest in the fleet. I can reach the core chamber in 40 seconds. That is a suicide run, Marcus. It's only if we wait too long. I can rig the ship to fly the final approach unmanned. Eject in an escape pod before impact. It is risky, but it is possible. Elena looked at her display. 1 minute, 50 seconds. The plasma core was nearly ready to fire. Around the flagship, human ships continued their assault, but it was not enough. It would never be enough. She thought about the Ilari, waiting on the surface below. Millions of innocent people who had done nothing wrong except exist, who had reached out into the darkness and trusted humanity to answer. Do it, she said. Her voice did not waver. And Marcus, do not miss. Yes, ma'am. The Defiance broke formation and accelerated toward the Kethver flagship. It was a small ship, designed for speed and reconnaissance rather than combat. Against the massive flagship, it looked like an insect approaching a mountain. On the Kethver bridge, Rexus watched the approaching vessel with contempt. His point defense systems came online, tracking the incoming ship. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds filled the space between them. The Defiance twisted and rolled, dodging fire with impossible precision. Cole flew like a man possessed, pushing his ship beyond every safety limit. Alarms screamed warnings that he ignored. Hull breaches opened along the port side, immediately sealed by emergency systems. 1 minute, 10 seconds to plasma discharge. All hands abandon ship, Cole announced over the internal comm. Report to escape pods immediately. That is an order. His crew obeyed without question. Escape pods launched from the Defiance one by one, carrying sailors away from the doomed vessel. Within 30 seconds, only Cole remained on the bridge. The Kethver point defense fire intensified. Rexus realized what the human was attempting and poured everything into stopping him. Energy beams scored the Defiance's hull. A lucky shot took out the port engine. The ship shuddered violently but did not slow. 50 seconds to plasma discharge. Cole activated the automated flight system, locking in the final trajectory. The computer would handle the last few seconds while he escaped. At least, that was the plan. Another shot hit the Defiance. This time, the damage was worse. The automated systems flickered and died. The ship began to drift off course. Cole made his decision without hesitation. He grabbed the manual controls and corrected the trajectory himself. The escape pod launch system was still functional. He could still get out, but only at the last possible second, when he was certain the ship would hit its target. 30 seconds to plasma discharge. On the horizon, Lena watched the Defiance streak toward the flagship. She could see the damage accumulating on the small ship. She could see it was barely holding together. Come on, Marcus, she whispered. Get out of there. Defiance closed the final distance. Point defense fire raked its hull continuously now, but there was nothing left to damage. The ship was barely more than a flying wreck held together by momentum and will. 15 seconds to plasma. Discharge. Cole reached for the escape pod controls. His hand hovered over the button. The flagship filled his view screen, massive and terrible. The plasma core chamber glowed with building energy directly ahead. He could see the exact point where he needed to hit. He pressed the button. The escape pod launched, hurling him away from the Defiance at maximum acceleration. For a moment, he tumbled through space, watching his ship continue on its final journey without him. 5 seconds. The Defiance struck the Kethver flagship at full velocity. It punched through the outer armor like a knife through paper and buried itself in the plasma. Core chamber. The explosion was not the catastrophic detonation that Rexus had intended for Eloria. Instead, it was a controlled collapse, the plasma energy dispersing harmlessly as the core chamber crumpled. Secondary explosions rippled through the flagship's systems, crippling weapons, engines, and shields. Vrexus screamed in rage as his bridge went dark. Emergency lighting flickered on, revealing damage reports scrolling across every functional screen. His flagship was dead in space. In the void, Marcus Cole drifted in his escape pod. Watching the explosion bloom like a flower made of light, he was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he was alive. "A Cole to horizon," he transmitted, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Target eliminated. Package delivered." On the Horizon's bridge, the crew erupted in cheers. Alina felt tears streaming down her face, but she did not care. "Good work, Lieutenant Commander," she managed. "Rescue team is on the way." "Do not go anywhere," Cole laughed weakly. "Was not planning on it, ma'am." Around the crippled flagship, the remaining Kethver fleet fell into complete disarray. Without their commander, without their hive mind connection, without hope of victory, they began to retreat. Ships that had never experienced defeat fled toward the edge of the system, desperate to escape the Deathworlders who had destroyed their armada. On the surface of Eloria, Elder Soraya watched the Kethber flagship go dark. She watched the enemy fleet scatter like frightened animals. She watched the human ships reforming into a protective formation. Around her world, the Eilari had called for help, the Deathworlders had answered, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The rescue shuttle found Marcus Cole, drifting 2 kilometers from the wreckage of his ship. When the airlock opened and the medical team rushed in, they found him sitting calmly in his pilot's seat, staring out at the stars with a peaceful expression on his face. "Lieutenant Commander, are you injured?" The lead medic asked. Cole turned to look at her. His face was covered in small cuts from flying debris, and his uniform was scorched in several places. But he smiled. "Nothing that will not heal," he said. "Did we win?" "Yes, sir. The Kethver are retreating. Eloria is safe." Cole nodded slowly and closed his eyes. "Good, that is good." He passed out before they could get him to the medical bay. In the hours that followed, the human fleet secured complete control of the space around Eloria. Kethver ships that had been disabled rather than destroyed were boarded by marine teams. Prisoners were taken, including Supreme Commander Vrexus himself, who was found trapped on the bridge of his crippled flagship, surrounded by the bodies of his officers. When the human marines cut through the sealed door, Vrexus looked up at them with something the Kethver had never experienced before. "Shame, you fight without honor," he clicked weakly. "You do not follow the rules of warfare." The Marine sergeant who led the boarding team looked down at the defeated commander. She was a small woman, barely reaching Vrexus's chest. But she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had faced worse things than an alien insect. "Rules of warfare?" she repeated. "You came here to harvest innocent people for parts? You threatened to burn an entire planet. There are no rules for what you are going to do. There is only justice." Vrexus was bound and transported to a human ship for trial. On the surface of Eloria, the Eilari emerged from their shelters to find a changed sky. The Kethver fleet was gone. In its place hung the angular silhouettes of human warships, standing guard over their world like silent protectors. Elder Soraya requested permission to meet with Commander Vance in person. The request was granted immediately. A shuttle descended through Eloria's crystalline atmosphere and landed on a platform overlooking the capital city. When the door opened, Elena Vance stepped out into the alien sunlight and felt her breath catch in her throat. Eloria was beautiful beyond words. The buildings were made of living crystal that sang softly in the wind. The trees glowed with gentle bioluminescence, even in daylight. The air smelled of flowers that had no earth equivalent, sweet and welcoming. Elder Soraya waited at the edge of the platform, surrounded by her advisors. She was smaller than Alina had expected, barely reaching the human commander's shoulder. Her skin glowed with soft blue light, and her large eyes reflected depths of emotion that humans could barely imagine. "Commander Vance," Soraya said, her voice carrying the musical quality common to her species. "There are no words in any language that can express what my people feel today." Lena bowed her head respectfully. "Your people saved our colonists 70 years ago. You asked for nothing in return. We were just repaying the debt." Soraya stepped forward and took Elena's hands in her own. The contact was warm. Elena felt something strange wash over her. Gratitude, relief, hope. The emotions were not her own. They were coming from Soraya, shared through the Alari's empathic abilities. It was more than repaying a debt, Soraya said softly. The galaxy abandoned us. The coalition that was supposed to protect the innocent calculated that our lives were not worth the cost of intervention. You came anyway. Not because of mathematics. Not because of strategic advantage. You came because it was right. Lena felt tears forming in her eyes. She had spent her entire career fighting for Earth, for humanity, for the people under her protection. But hearing those words from an alien elder whose species she had just saved touched something deep inside her. That is what humans do, she said simply. Or at least, that is what we try to do. Soraya smiled. It was a strange expression on her alien face, but unmistakably genuine. Then Earth will always have a home among the stars. The Alari do not forget those who stand with us in our darkest hour. Whatever comes next, know that you have friends here. The news of the battle spread across the galaxy within days. Every species, every government, every individual learned what had happened at Aloria. The Galactic Coalition that had refused to help watched in stunned silence as 42 human ships defeated 300 Kethfer vessels. Analysts tried to explain it. They studied the human tactics, their technology, their biology. They measured the strength that came from Earth's heavy gravity. They calculated the advantages of human persistence and endurance. But none of their analysis captured the truth. The humans had won because they cared. They had crossed the galaxy to help a species they barely knew because it was the right thing to do. They had fought against impossible odds because surrender was not in their nature. They had risked everything because they understood something that the Coalition had. It's forgotten some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. 6 months later, Marcus Cole stood in a field on Aloria. Watching the sunset paint the crystalline trees in shades of gold and crimson, he had recovered fully from his injuries, though he carried a few new scars that would never completely fade. The Alari had given him honorary citizenship and gratitude for his sacrifice. He visited whenever he could, finding peace on the gentle world that he had helped to save. An Ilari child approached him, her skin glowing with curious patterns of light. She looked up at him with wide eyes and asked a simple question. Why did you come to save us? Cole knelt down so he could meet her gaze. He thought about everything he had seen. The fear on the faces of the Alari when the Kethfer surrounded their world. The courage of his crew as they flew into battle. The explosion that had nearly killed him and the rescue that had saved his life. Because where I come from, he said gently, that is just what people do. The child tilted her head, considering his answer. Then she smiled and took his hand, leading him toward the village where the evening celebrations were beginning. Behind them, the sun set over Aloria, painting the sky in colors that no human had ever seen before. And somewhere among the stars, the galaxy whispered a new truth to itself. Never mistake humanity's kindness for weakness. The Deathworlders protect those who cannot protect themselves, and they never forget their friends.